So, the plan is to talk about practice and climate change, or something like that. And the reason I had us chant the Ehe Koso Hotsugaman is because it was set in a time like ours. So, Buddhists for a long time have thought that there would be 3 ages. There was the first age, beginning with when Buddha lived, when there was practice, teaching, and enlightenment. The second age, things were going downhill a little bit, but there was still practice and teaching, no enlightenment. And the third age, called in Japanese the Mappo, or the age of decline, there's just teaching, no real practice, no enlightenment. How depressing. So they thought they were living in that time, and actually they thought it had just started, within the last couple hundred years. And it was supposed to last for 8,000 years, which is really depressing until Maitreya comes and the next Buddha. And in this view of things, there are a series of Buddhas, and after each one, there's things go on, and then they decline a bit, and then the next Buddha shows up. So in Dogen's time, there are at least 2 schools of Buddhism that started in Japan, I don't know about others, that were based on the assumption that you can't get enlightened in this time. Nothing personal, just can't be done. One of them the founder was Nichiren, and they chant the title of the Lotus Sutra, and they chant the Lotus Sutra, and they're still with us today. And they chant for material things and well-being of various kinds, and sometimes they get them. And so they have more poor people and more people of color than the other kinds of Buddhism in America, which you could say they're doing something right, and they evangelize. The other one is Shodo Shin. Shodo Shin, they call on Amitabha to help them be reborn in the Pure Land, from whence they can proceed to enlightenment. Pure Land is a very nice place. I have not done anything with either of those schools except very, very, I've dipped my toe into each one a little bit. So, in the same time, here we have Dogen, who says, first he says, well, we vow with all beings, from this life on throughout countless lives, to hear the true Dharma. Okay, we are going to listen. That's simple. And he mentions all beings, and he says we're not going to quit. So this is a pretty big vow. I vow to hear the Dharma. And then we have 2 translations here. So Taigen, who we both know, was a fine translator, said we will not be skeptical, and somebody said we will not doubt. No doubt will arise in us, nor will we lack in faith. And that upon meeting it, we will renounce worldly affairs and maintain the Buddha Dharma. And finally, together with the great earth and all animate beings, we will accomplish the Buddha way. So, part 1, abandon mundane affairs, renounce worldly affairs. This is like step 1. What's important, the car or the Dharma? The lovely dinner or your peace of mind, your equanimity, your connection with all beings? And I'm going to spend some time on this because we live in I won't say age, but a generation or a couple of generations, my whole lifetime, when increasingly society has encouraged us to prioritize material things and personal experiences, happiness, over our connection with the rest of the universe. It's not new, but it's like, because I've lived for 70 years, I can say it's more now than it was in the 1950s. The 1950s were, they were doing it, but churches were stronger then, and the idea of altruism was stronger then, and now pretty well everything other than greed has been ridiculed. In the 60s, Ayn Rand was a right-wing wacko, and now an awful lot of people are listening to her and quoting her. And since I was reading her in the 60s, I am horrified. Because her whole thing was, don't share, be selfish, and do it yourself, as if doing it yourself didn't involve a peaceful society, enough to eat, some self-esteem, some basic education, and access to both physical and psychological things, factors that are provided to greater or lesser degree by our society. Okay, example, Walt Disney, who is famous for Mickey Mouse, he had a character before Mickey Mouse that was pretty cool. He didn't copyright it, somebody stole it. So he had to start over. He made Mickey Mouse and he copyrighted it. The protection of the government allows people to flourish, and it interferes with bullies. Sometimes it supports bullies, but that's a different subject. So Dogen says, abandon worldly affairs, maintain the Buddha Dharma. There are a lot of ways we maintain the Buddha Dharma. One of those ways is just by having our priorities in order. One of those ways is by practicing, we say sitting zazen, but calming down, the Eightfold Path, which I'm not going to do all the details of, but leading an ethical life, keeping our thought patterns reasonable, not crazed, like that thing about greed is good. A lot of people actually believe that now. And thoughts, actions, and calming down, mindfulness and samadhi. I'm going to bring in the phrase wetiko.
Say it again.
Wetiko, W-E-T-I-K-O. It's, I think, I don't know which language it's from. I was going to say Cree, but I think their word is Wendigo. It's a ghost. It's an evil spirit that comes out, and parents use it to scare their children at night. It's a cannibal spirit. And when Europeans came to this continent, people looked at them and said, oh my God. Professor Jack Forbes wrote a book called Columbus and Other Cannibals, in which he describes this, and there's some other books about it. And people now, it's like mainstream people, I don't want to just say white people, because lots of people can get this disease, and it is catching. It is the disease of our culture and our age. the example of somebody who takes everything for themselves and doesn't share all the time, you know. So that disease is being recognized by mainstream people who care about the environment and who increasingly are starting to listen to indigenous people who, as far as I can tell, around the world, the people who lived closer to the land took care of it. They might have taken care of it just because they would die if they didn't. But you hear other things too, like, oh, I met a guy in Anchorage who said he learned to listen to the birds. He said they give weather reports. People in a lot of places are able to hear or to understand what's being said by the trees and the rivers, the birds and the bears, and so forth. And if you look back in Buddhism, you find this. In the Metta Sutta, famous for starting the practice of loving kindness meditation. The story is that the Buddha and maybe 300 disciples were looking for a place to spend the rains retreat for 3 months. And they found this great village to go for begging with a river and a forest. And so they showed up, everybody picked a tree and sat down under it, and the trees welcomed them. And then the trees noticed that they were not leaving, and they became annoyed. And the monks were a little careless too. I don't know what the equivalent of dropping trash was. But anyway, so the trees talked to each other and decided to get rid of them, and they started, like, great winds came up, branches fell down on these guys, and they complained to the Buddha, who said, he taught them the Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by the one who is wise, who seeks the good and would obtain peace. Even as a mother watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all living things, suffusing love over the entire world. So he taught the monks, and presumably not only said the sutra, but they changed their attitude. And they all lived happily for the rest of the retreat. And I believe all of them are said to have gotten enlightened. But, you know, they make up these stories. And so for a long time, I thought, well, that's one of those stories, you know. It's like the Jataka tales, which are told to children, which the Buddha was a rabbit or, some animal and did some great kind deed in an earlier life, and eventually wound up being reborn again and again until he was reborn as the Buddha, or the baby who would become the Buddha. And because of listening, I have changed my mind. I don't think these are silly stories. I don't know about the Jataka tales. I would have to look into them. But early Buddhists actually saw or experienced the beings around them as conscious. Now, we have a teaching that says all sentient beings, and then you have a discussion about what's a sentient being. I had this discussion recently with Courtney Work, who is an anthropologist who works with remote villages in Cambodia. And she has great stories about what, you shouldn't call it primitive Buddhism, but that's how you would distinguish it from the fancied up, rigid, correct Buddhism, intellectual Buddhism, whatever. And their mountain has many names. One of the names is grandfather. One of the names is something like, this is the one in charge of everything. On one of these pages, I actually have quotations from her. Um, and so I said to her, I actually think that atoms and molecules are conscious beings. And she said, yes. So I'm because I want to think this way. I think I've actually thought this way since I was studying physics and very excited about the relationship between energy and matter. So now it's not energy, it's consciousness and matter and beings. But I am trying to look at Buddhism and test that thought and not just go off on my own ideas. Maybe if I were enlightened, I could go off on my own ideas. But enlightenment seems to produce matching ideas. That's why I say that. It's like, oh, you actually see how things are. Oh, okay, nice. Anyway, where was I? Okay. So I was talking about upholding and maintaining the Buddha Dharma, accomplishing the way together with the great earth and all beings. Is this all animate beings, all living beings, all conscious beings? Sentient means something that has feelings, as in it can feel pain, for instance. So that's a lot. It's more now. We didn't used to think that trees and plants could feel things, although some people knew it, and now a lot of people know it. They take care of their children. They help each other. We're starting to learn things that our ancestors knew. So let's see. So he's talking during the time when you can't get enlightened. Well, first he asks for help from the Buddhas and ancestors who attained the Buddha way. May they be compassionate to us. May they free us from the effects of our karmic actions. May they allow us to practice the way without hindrance. And then he makes this total revolutionary statement. Buddhas and ancestors were as we in the future will be Buddhas and ancestors. It's a promise. We are not different from those people way back then. And that, it's like, it stops me. It's like, oh, really? I'm not the exception. Everybody, enlightenment is the natural state. It belongs to everyone. And we just keep going like that. It's scary not to go like that. So, but there he is. We are one with Buddhas and ancestors. And then he quotes Chan Master Lungya. Before enlightenment, ancient Buddhas were the same as we. After enlightenment, we will be exactly as those ancient ones. So, and then he says the way to do it: studying, mastering causes and conditions, let them help. And then he uses the word repentance and the word confession. So those words have religious meaning and maybe a little baggage for most of us. So let me just say, confessing to something means saying that it's true. It means letting it out into the open instead of keeping it secret. That's what confession is. A lot of religions have confession to, Catholics confess to a priest. Early Buddhism had a ceremony twice a month in which every monastic person actually had to admit what was going on. And it's like, lancing an infected wound. It lets things heal. Repentance means coming home. And to me, it means turn back. It means let's go home. Let's be part of the community. Let's be part of the community of life. Let's stop thinking that we're separate. Let's stop thinking that I'm the best or that I'm the worst. Any of those. We're just part of the whole thing. So, so the question of how to practice in a hard time, those are Dogen's answers. Renounce worldly affairs, maintain the Buddha Dharma, confess, repent. My response, obviously, I gave you my version of Dogen's things. So all of those things. And the main response that I've had is based on the fact that we're part of the family of life. That's not actually a Buddhist phrasing. It's the phrasing that is workable for people on the street. The Buddhist phrasing is, we're not separate. Even though we totally experience ourselves as separate. It's like I'm looking out of my eyes at you, and you, and you. And you are hearing my voice and looking at me. And we can't just, trade places like that. So that's the way we experience reality, and the way the other side of reality is that we are totally not separate. It's like you wouldn't be here if it weren't for my voice. You'd probably be looking at the wall. Or maybe you'd be outside somewhere. We are totally not separate, and we are created all the time by everything around us. We're also created by our history. Karmic actions have effects. But there's this thing going on that is just lively and full of energy, and here we are. We're just this little piece of the action. Each one of us is a particular expression of the life force. Another non-Buddhist expression. So, based on that, and based on some experiences I had of asking for and receiving help, I determined that the most useful thing that I myself would do in this time would be to work together with non-human beings. And so I asked them, okay, this started when I have a farm. It's a beautiful place. It's pretty wild. And somebody sold a piece of property next door, and there's a section of it where the sale was contingent on being able to build a house on the hill, the sacred hill. So, you have a hill, and then you have a property line, and I heard this, and I went up there, and the best place, the only place you could possibly put a house up there is like right there, right next to the property line. And it was like, it would ruin everything, They would mow, I don't know what they would do. But I was depressed, I was upset. I contacted people who told me there was nothing I could do. And an energy healer said, don't you ask the land to do something about it? So at the end of a 5-day sesshin, on the last day, I put on my hiking clothes and hiking boots and went out there and walked and walked and walked and said, please help me. Please protect yourselves. Please don't let this happen. And I was out there for a few hours, all afternoon, I think. And I started to think that I was hearing answers, and I would walk through the woods and I would feel them speaking to me. And finally, at the end of the afternoon, I went back and I was at peace. I couldn't guarantee that it wasn't going to happen. But over the next few months, I noticed that it didn't happen. And 2 years later, I looked online at the property line stuff. And they had moved things around so that that little piece of land was now part of the wild and scenic area where you can't build something, instead of part of that stuff across the road where you can. And I thought, and it was like, okay, they answered. And so now we have the Mountains and Waters Alliance. Mountains and Waters is named after a text. I could have gone Valley Streams, but somehow Mountains and Waters was like the right name for it. So that's what I do. I chant, I sit, I invite people to sit, and I talk about this crazy thing. And I try to get more clear about the Buddhist foundation for it. And I found that Buddhists actually express interest. The people who think it's utterly crazy or heretical or something are not talking to me. I assume there are such people. Yeah. Well, we go to the conferences and I present a workshop. So that's how this investigation happens. So that's the core of what I do, and then I feel like I need to be connected with other people. So I've chosen mostly to limit my activism to environmental stuff, and there's pipeline issues in northern Minnesota, so that's my focus. But the sense of creating is important. Now I have a discussion section, but let me stop for a second and see if anyone has comments or questions on this while I eat something.
I feel like you have enough time to get everything done.
Well, it was funny, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, well, if there were 5 of me, I could do this. And one of those was a farmer, and one of them was a cook, and one of them was putting on programs. And I forget the other 2, except that then I got to just like carry the vision, as my friend said. It does not feel as heavy now, even though I now have a half-time job, which should make it worse. I'm doing less. I would like to do more, but I'm doing less. And the main thing that I'm not doing is I'm not farming much. I have some fruit trees I need to do. I have lots of projects that some of which I will just do, and some of which I will only do if people show up. And I'm tired of recruiting people, so it may take a while. And that flavor, that thing came out partly. I have always loved the woods. I've always wanted to be out in nature. It's the only place I want to be. And the 3 months that I walked along the pipeline, even though a lot of it was not in nature, it was so incredible. Because I physically slept on the ground. I was surrounded by it all day long. My body was moving. My body got so strong. It was great. And so I immersed myself in nature for that. And I'm sad that I have to stay put, but I do. The part that's inviting other people, that's the part I'm weakest at. But my job in this is to go spend time in the woods talking to trees and listening to them. That's my primary job. And that resonates with me. Oh, and so the reason I have these 5 questions. Wait, did I answer? You didn't have a question,
Yes,
right?
no.
Okay. So these 5 questions come from Derek Jensen, who is definitely not a Buddhist. And you'll see these are not absolute questions. These are very, in the personal realm. So the first one is, what do you love? And that's like, well, what do you love so much that you would give your life for it? The second one is, what are your gifts? Mm. I'm looking for the exact wording. When I quote people, I like to do it properly. Somehow, there they are. Okay. What is the largest, most pressing problem that you can help to solve using the gifts that are unique to you in all the universe? So, what is the largest problem that you can help to solve? Given that everybody has different gifts, so it's not the same answer for all of us. And then he throws in this other one, which is the environmentalist one. What does your land base need to survive? And I think that's just adding a flavor like, well, are we going to have water here in 5 years? Will there still be rain? Is there something I can do about that? People who have a piece of land can actually do something. I read yesterday a report from the fires in Australia, and there's a man who, they said he had been working for 30 years to make his farm fire resistant. Australia always has fires. They just have more this year. And he said he watched this raging inferno moving towards him, and then it stopped. And I was very encouraged by that, because I know a lot of things about how you fireproof land, but I haven't tested it. And I'm not in a situation where I need to, although I might be in the future. So to hear that it's been tested, that felt good. And so the author of the article was saying, okay, so we need fire breaks. We need lots of places where this is done so the fire can be stopped. What does your land base need to survive? And the last question is, are you going to do it? Ooh. Ooh. Yes.
You had me until 5.
You know, and I will say one thing about doing it. So during my lifetime, I have had lots of wonderful ideas of things I wanted to do, and then I wouldn't do them. It was because I had children, or I didn't have the money, or something. Well, I finally did one. It feels so good. It feels so good. The first one that I did, it was 2004, and I was in between training centers, and I went to the convention in Boston and led sitting meditation on a square near the Democratic National Convention. And somebody else brought some people. Most people thought we were protesting. The only reporter who didn't think we were protesting was from an Asian newspaper. She had actually read and understood the press release. I was so grateful. But we have, just like when we did the walk along the pipeline, I had to say, it's not a protest. Some writer turned it into, they're protesting a way of life. It's like, okay, you can have that. Not that I had a choice about it, but it's like people really wanted to be protesting something. And it's like, no, we're doing a ceremony. I didn't say that so much then. I say it more now. We're doing a prayer. One of our people, an American living in Japan, said, it's kind of a peace walk. But, and during that walk, people, before it and after it, people kept telling me about other walks. And it was like I thought I was doing something really cool, but Native people do walks all the time, and they do runs. It's like, oh my gosh, I just happened to step into this very ancient tradition. You don't know what to do, just start putting your feet on the ground and say what it's about. So yeah, are you going to do it? So I wanted to say that because I wanted to say, once you've done it, you won't want to go back. You won't want to go back to being half dead. This is like, Dogen went to a monastery and then he went to China. Something told him to do it. And we are all reaping the benefits. The Buddha wanted to understand suffering. We are all reaping the benefits because he actually did leave home, walked out on his family. But we're all reaping the benefits of his following what was speaking to him. Okay, I'm going to eat, but I'll answer questions or converse.
Do you remember the first time you sat and meditated?
Let's see. Yes and no. The no is because I was doing something that I thought was meditation for a couple of years before I stumbled into Zen. And I would do it regularly. And if my children interrupted me, I would yell at them. It's important to confess, right? I was so embarrassed. But I did learn, and I learned to say, do you need anything from me before I meditate? Oh, and then I took them to a therapist who asked this classic question, is there a phrase that your mother says most often? And they said, do you need anything before you meditate? And she said, oh, and what difference does it make? Does it make a difference that your mother meditates? Or since she started meditating? And they said, in unison, she doesn't get so angry anymore. I had not even known that I had an anger problem. But now I know I have an anger problem. 30 years later or something.
Does your anger still sometimes come out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mostly in fantasy, though. And I try not to say things on Facebook that will get me in trouble.
What was the type of meditation you were doing for 2 years?
Yeah, good question. I think it was like sitting down and watching my breath. I don't think I was doing visualizations, but it was kind of new agey. So, who knows? In 1983, I went to a workshop at Minnesota Zen Center, and it included a brief training in Zazen, and then we sat for 15 minutes, and I liked it. It felt good. And I believe, I'm not sure, I think it was Timbercat. Anyway, so then we got to the end of the day, and there was a little extra time left. And so they said, well, is there anything you'd like to do? And I said, could we sit some more? And they said, no, you have to come back. So for the next year or something, I sat at home, having not a clue why people would do it together. Now I understand why people do it together. It's so nice.
Now when you sit, what do you visualize?
Well, I don't visualize. There are 2 or 3 things that I do, depending. So sometimes sometimes I follow my physical sensations. My diaphragm is tight. And my teacher says abdominal breathing actually matters. And so sometimes I'll just watch my breath go this way. Sometimes there's something called shikantaza, which is actually the practice that my teacher teaches. And that means if a thought comes up, drop it. And then drop it again. And then drop it again. And I had originally been given the impression that this was like shikantaza is enlightenment itself, and you can't do it. But when I was with my present teacher, I noticed that new people would come in and they didn't seem to think it was impossible. They seemed to do just fine. So I tried it. And I found that it's really terrifying because when you drop your thoughts, you drop your ideas about yourself. And you're letting in the universe. So this is like the best. In my book. My book. There are lots of bests. So anything in the group of watching your breath, watching your physical sensations. And then there's another one, which is watching the mind. And that's kind of hard. The mind that I'm watching is the one that in Buddhist teachings observes everything. It has a name, alaya. And it collects, actually. It notes what you do. It collects your karma. It gives it back to you later. I was taught to do this. And I found it was a way to get really, really calm. And really calm. And then I got bored and I started doing, I had to figure out where to put it. I had to imagine it in a place because I'm working with this mind. So I'd put it there. And then sometimes I'd put it in, let's put it in that place that hurts. And so I played around with this, watching the mind. And then I noticed that it was watching me. And so we'd, watch each other. And that I liked that a lot. And so coming to a teacher who had something different to offer was like, it was a big thing. But I wanted to learn what he had to offer, so I let go of that. So if things are being really hard, I will do the physical thing. And if I have a lot of interesting ideas, sometimes I'll sit and I'll project the mind, the alaya, onto them. I go, okay, look at you, you look at me. Okay. I have not done this with the general concept of climate change, but I could.
So sometimes when I meditate, and I'm just trying to breathe and watch my thoughts. I have really good ideas. So today,
right? Yes.
Today I was like, well, maybe when I meditate at home, I should pre-meditate. I should meditate, write down all my ideas that I have, and then I'm like,
play with the little
I
cute
want to write down
puppies.
all this stuff I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know.
That premeditating is an interesting idea because catching those brilliant thoughts, which you think you will never have again, it's like it's a sidetrack.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
You have all those great ideas, but there's something you didn't do. So I was given a name by Katagiri Roshi, and I had difficulty with it. And once during sesshin, I asked him what it meant. And he made this wonderful answer. And I didn't write it down because you're not supposed to write during sesshin. I really did forget it, and I still don't know what he said. I do know what Reb Anderson said, though. And I did look things up in the Japanese English dictionaries. So I kind of know what that's about. But yeah, It's like what is it?
What did Rip Anderson say?
He said, friendly with enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
Tagan Layton said, something tranquility. Obviously, I liked Reb's answer better. So I had a broken ankle, and I was at Tassajara, and a broken foot. And I looked in the books. There's a character in that name that was really unusual. So it was hard, but I did eventually find it. And the tranquility part is relevant. And I don't remember because I have a different name now. I changed teachers and got a new name.
What does the new name mean?
It means right path or true path. And I'm pretty sure he gave it to me because of the walking.
You know, when I was young, getting on an airplane, all these things, you know, people want to travel and see things. And part of human nature is wanting to provide ourselves with more than we have, and there was a time when that was for survival.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know where, you know, certainly by ancient Egypt it has switched. But, you know, I don't think that people, you know, several generations ago thought, well, I need to get on a plane and fly across the ocean to Europe or fly to Japan or whatever. But this expectation of what we could do with our mind, we could engineer, was so helpful for us. And then somewhere it turned, it became like destroying the world.
Yeah.
Like an
And,
overactive imagination in a way.
Right.
It's
And so our knowledge is in our ability to engineer and provide things for ourselves that we want, and experiences that we want, and places we want to go. Like now people want to go to the moon and stay in a hotel.
Oh,
You
right.
know, which is going to
Yeah.
probably come along sooner than you think. And so when did it become this way? You know, I can see glimmers of it coming along like in the late 70s, early 80s, when everything was about me, the me generation and everything. You know, when I was growing up, it was about, well, what am I going to do in my life, and how am I going to make my life meaningful, my life exciting? And part of that meant, you know, to burn as much fossil fuel as I possibly, you know, going on airplanes or, you know, having my own car and mobility and consuming things. And so, you know, now I think for the last 10 years for me personally, you know, I keep saying, God, this is just affluenza that's killing you.
Yeah.
And it's probably killing the planet, actually.
It is.
And so it just seems to be the human condition. And I don't know, it's, you know, I look at things just even in the last 10 years and see, like living here, I constantly hear a plane going over all the time. And I've lived in this neighborhood for 25 years, and there's always been a lot of airplanes. But now I just notice all the time it's just planes. So it just seems like the consumption and the activity, and even our neighborhood here, I've lived in this neighborhood for a long time, now it's just building. So it's exponentially growing, it seems. I don't know how to, seems hard to, what kind of realizations do humans have to have as a species even, to realize that. And we want to be entertained all the time, you know, with television. We have so many, you know, you can watch so much on television now.
You're always distracted with the press and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I used to kind of
Distractions.
make fun of the Amish and think these people are crazy. But now, you know, you look at them and think, wow.
It looks pretty good, doesn't
looks
it?
like it's, yeah, they had a pretty good idea.
Yeah. And more people are going that way. So I want to challenge saying human nature. I don't think it's human nature. It's this society which thinks it's the only true humans. So it relegates everybody else to, say, primitive.
But the whole world is westernized. You know, China, you know,
Well,
India is going that way.
Well, yeah, but that's this civilization.
Oh, you're including, no, you're not saying Americans.
I'm pointing out, yeah, it's like, so something came out of Europe, got crazier in America. It's like America's adolescent, at least Europeans are, they're a little grown up, and besides, they already cut down their trees.
Right.
So they're reaping consequences, and we still have a few left to go.
And they had less land and resources than we could.
Right,
till
yeah.
for.
Jared Diamond's Collapse is relevant.
I've read that.
Yeah. But so the idea that, let's see, that nature is here for us to use and to do whatever we want with, that idea is a problem. And most of the people on Earth have not had that idea, even though we've been selling it.
Well, we don't even think driving the car is using the earth anymore. We just think that that's how we go to where we want to go. We don't think that flying an airplane is using the earth.
Well, right. And some of us do. And I lived without a car for a year and a half, which kind of barely worked in Bloomington, Indiana, and really did not work in Anchorage. Oh my gosh.
Kind of need a car.
Now I live on a farm. In Atlanta, you have a bus system.
I think.
Oh, I have a bicycle.
Ah,
Yeah.
right. And you live in a city, so bicycles go a long way. I live in the country. And I went, okay, if you're going to live in the country, I mean, theoretically, I could bicycle 10 miles or 6 miles into the nearest town. I just don't seem to be doing it.
Except you have snow and all these.
Well, yeah, not in the winter. It's like the only way I can do that is horses or equivalent animals. And so I'm using things that feel wrong to me. And what I've done, see, is they feel wrong to me. So I've been to Japan once, Korea once on the same trip, Hong Kong once for a conference, and Cambodia once to do a month-long volunteer thing. And I keep saying, well, I don't do that, you know. Someone told me that you could book a berth on a freighter.
Mm-hmm.
They're going anyway. And then you haven't added to the problem. But it takes more time, of course. So basically it's like, okay, I'm not visiting Japan. I wanted to see the stone circles in Ireland. I should have gone before I knew better.
Before enlightenment, yeah.
Yeah, that enlightenment, yeah. Or before getting woke.
Stone circles. After enlightenment, no stone circles.
Right, yeah. But I have met some pretty magical places in this country, so it's just, those are like connected with my history. Not totally, I'm German, so.
Someone was showing me this phone app where it's a European app, but basically you put in a picture of a place that you really want to visit.
Yeah.
That's like far away, you know, and then it'll show you a picture of a place that's really close to you. That that looks the same. You can just go there instead.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of cool.
But it's only in Europe?
Because, I mean, yeah, it was made
Yeah.
for Europe.
Mhm.
There's a lot of places in Europe to go by train.
There would be. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
That's a
And
neat
I thought it
idea.
was cool. Because instead of, you know,
Like you want to go to Rome, and then you
Yeah.
can see Roman ruins in England or something.
yeah.
Oh,
I want to go to Australia to see the waterfall. So,
well,
you can see
It's on fire.
Yeah.
right, yeah. So anyway, well, if they come up with this app for this continent, share it with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't do apps much, but that would be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it actually is 4:30. Any more comments or questions?
Great talk.
Thank you.
Oh, good. I was like, so I'm saying all this stuff, you know,
We were
and you're
listening.
looking. I was like, what's he thinking? What's he thinking? Because you're the one with the Zen training, right?
It's great talk.
Okay. Okay, good. Oh no, oh good.